Yeah.
Good morning and welcome everyone to another Monday morning lecture. As always, please do keep yourself on mute, and also for the smooth flow of the presentation, turn your videos off. You can turn them on at the end of the lecture. And if you have any questions, type them into the chat, and Oksana and I will moderate the chat and ask the speaker the questions at the end of the session. Uh, Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Nestor T. Castro, all the way from the Philippines. He is a professor of anthropology at the University of Philippines, Diliman. Specializing in cultural anthropology, his expertise includes ethnicity and indigenous peoples issues, environmental and social impact assessment, and cultural heritage management. His works have been published in notable journals such as Le Temps Moderne, New Asian Visions, Colloquium, The New Horizon of Contemporary Sociological Theory, the Philippine Social Sciences Review, and the Diliman Review. So, and today he is going to be introducing the various Philippine ethnic groups to us. So over to Dr. Castro.
Good morning to everyone. I just learned that there are people who come from different countries listening to this lecture right now. So my topic is on Philippine ethnic groups, and we have two objectives for this presentation. Okay, the first objective is to identify the various ethnic groups in the Philippines. So this is a brief introduction and profile, as well as describe the key cultural characteristics of these ethnic groups. So just to level off about our understanding of what an ethnic group is, coming from an anthropological definition, an ethnic group refers to any group of people who set themselves apart and or are set apart by others with whom they interact or coexist on the basis of their perceptions of cultural differentiation and or common descent. So ethnicity is not a biological construct, but it is a social and psychological construct. If people feel that they are different from the rest of society, then we recognize them as a different group of people. And this is why we don't have an exact count of how many ethnic groups there are in the Philippines, because new groups are formed, former groups have vanished. So let us look at some of these ethnic groups. So the Philippines is an ethnically diverse country. From one source, this is Dr. Robert Fox, the former director of the National Museum of the Philippines. He mentioned that there are at least 106 ethnic groups in the country. Now, we have a government agency in the Philippines. This is called the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples. And according to this agency, there are 110 indigenous groups in the Philippines. Now, when NCIP identifies indigenous groups, it is referring to groups that have relatively maintained their traditional beliefs and practices. And they have excluded those groups that are more acculturated and part of the mainstream Philippine society. So I think both uh, counts, that of Dr. Fox and the NCIP, are very conservative estimates. Because if we look at languages in the Philippines, we have more than 170 languages, and we know that language is usually a marker for ethnic identity. Now in the Philippines, so this is a map of the Philippines. The Philippines is an archipelago. We have more than 7,100 islands. And of course, the biggest island will be Luzon at the northern part and Mindanao at the southern part. And because of the archipelagic character of the Philippines, we have several ethnic groups, and they are identified based on the following criteria. First is linguistic differences. In the Philippines, usually we call ethnic groups as ethno-linguistic groups because language is a primary criterion. If you speak a particular language different from the rest, then you are defined as a distinct ethnic group. The other criterion is domicile. Are they highland peoples, agricultural societies, maritime communities, etc.? Third will be phenotypic characteristics. I'll explain it later. Fourth will be religion or religious affiliation, belief systems. Fifth will be various cultural traits such as costumes, musical traditions, etc. And lastly, ancestry or migration history. Now, based on this different criteria, let us look at linguistic diversity in the Philippines. So, according to Ethnologue published by the Summer Institute of Linguistics, there are 172 languages that are used in the Philippines, three of which are foreign languages. These are English, Minnan Chinese, and Castilian Spanish. So the remaining 169 languages are indigenous to the country, 168 of which are spoken languages, and there is one visual language. This is Filipino Sign Language. Of the 169 uh, uh, spoken languages, 168 belong to Austronesian family of languages, and there is one Creole language. This is Chavacano. And there are several dialects for each language. So, for example, Tagalog is the biggest linguistic group, and there will be various dialects of Tagalog. In terms of domicile, many ethnic groups in the Philippines are located in specific ecosystems, and the ethnic names that they assign to themselves are related to the environmental setting where they are found. For example, the biggest ethnic group is called the Tagalog, which literally means people of the river. The Kapampangan, meaning people of the coast. The Tausug, people of the current. The Iraya Mangyan, people of the upstream. The Maranao, people of the lake. Sama Dilaut, people of the sea. Of course, I could not discuss all of this more than 110 ethnic groups because it will take us time, but I will focus on some more than others. Now, with regards to those ethnic groups that are found in the hinterlands, some groups are called the Bukidnon, which means people of the mountain, Igorot, people of the ridge, Remontado, which is a Spanish word, people who have retreated to the mountains. Originally, they belong to the lowlands because they have resisted Spanish colonization, they have retreated to the mountains. The Tingyan, people of the highlands, from the Malay word tinggi, which means high, Bontok, which literally means mountain, Taot Bato, literally stone people, but because they are people who live in stone caves. And forest dwellers, such as the Ikalahan and the Gubatnon, both meaning people of the forest. Now, in terms of phenotypic characteristics, so I'm going through these five different criteria first before explaining and describing the characteristics of these groups. Uh, Generally, we have two groups of people in the Philippines based on phenotypes or outward appearances. So the first group is the Negrito, which comes from the Spanish word meaning little black people. They are the Aboriginal people of the Philippines. And in this picture, you could see the Negrito here at the rightmost part of the picture, together with my two students from the university interviewing him. And you will see phenotypic differences. Uh, some are darker skinned than others, some are fairer skinned than others. Interestingly, the term negrito is an exonym. So it's an outsider's category assigned by the Spanish from the Spanish word negro, which means black. So negrito because they are uh, small in terms of height. But for the Negritos themselves, they distinguish peoples of the Philippines, whether they are kulot or kinky-haired, or unat or straight-haired. So they don't see the skin color. What they recognize is hair texture. And this is something that is interesting. In terms of religious diversity, our latest census in the country, the 2010 Census of Population and Housing, identified that majority of Filipinos are Roman Catholic, that this is 81% of the population. And in the lower right picture, this is a basilica, a church in the heart of Manila, very famous for a devotion to the Black Nazarene of Christ. 6% are Muslim Filipinos, mainly in southern Philippines. And the picture in the upper right is a grand mosque, also in Manila. So there would also be a Muslim community even in Manila. The others are evangelicals, 3%, Iglesia ni Cristo, which is a local Christian church, 2%, and 8% others, including animists. So the picture on the lower left is a ritual celebration in northern Philippines, of course, revering to ancestral spirits. In terms of various cultural traits, so people are differentiated because they have different traditional costumes, different body decoration and ornamentation, different musical instruments and weapons, different ritual practices, beliefs, worldview, etc. Now, in these two photographs, both are gongs. They are musical instruments found in the Philippines. Interestingly, in terms of geographical distribution of these gongs, the flat brass gongs found in the picture in the upper photo are found in Luzon Island. This is in northern Philippines. While the bossed gongs, this lower picture below, are found in Visayas and Mindanao. So in central Philippines and Indonesia as well as Malaysia. So there's a difference in terms of material culture, also based on geographic spread. Another interesting part about the picture above, this gong has a holder with a mandible, lower mandible of a human. So it's a human jaw because in the past, people of the northern Luzon practiced head taking, and they will take the head of their enemies as war trophies, take the lower jaw, and convert them into handles for these gongs. Of course, This is no longer practiced. If you ask them, who does this Joe Bone belong to? They will say, these are Japanese soldiers that we killed during World War II. In terms of ancestry or migration history, I mentioned a while ago that the Negritos were the first inhabitants of the Philippines and arrived into the archipelago about 30,000 years ago. The other populations of the Philippines, comprising the majority of Filipinos, belong to Austronesian speaking peoples that came from mainland Asia, came later into the country about 2500 BC. And the photograph shows the remains of a prehistoric boat. This is a 4th century boat found in the National Museum of the Philippines. It was unearthed in Mindanao, and many archaeologists believe that such types of boats were used by Austronesians when they arrived into the country. So relating this with the phenotypic characteristics, the Negritos are the dark-skinned populations, while the Austronesian-speaking peoples, which comprise the majority of Filipinos, are will have fairer skin relatively compared to the Negritos. Okay, so based on the 2000 Census of Population and Housing of the Philippines, it was identified that there are only 8 ethnic groups that make up 82% of the country. Now, why 2000 census? Why not 2010 census? The census for religious diversity was 2010, but ethnicity was 2000. Unfortunately, in 2010, the measurement of ethnicity was no longer included in the census instrument because our Philippine Statistics Authority decided to improve the instrument for a later use, but it was not implemented in 2010. So I hope that it will be implemented now in 2020. So these 8 biggest ethnic groups are the Tagalog, which are found in the Metro Manila area, the National Capital Region, comprising of 28% of the population. The Cebuano, found in Central Philippines, 23%. Ilocano, 9%, found in Western Luzon Island. Hiligaynon, also found in the Visayas in Central Philippines, comprising 7%. Bicol, found in Southern Luzon Island, 6%. Waray in Eastern Visayas in Central Philippines, 3.3%. Kapampangan, north of Manila, 3%. And Pangasinan, less than 2%. So if you add all of these 8, these already make up 82% of the population. So we have uh, about more than 100 ethnic groups in the country, but 8 groups comprise 82%, while the 8% are distributed to smaller populations of ethnic communities. Now, what are the common characteristics of these 8 groups? These 8 groups are dominantly found in lowland agricultural communities. They are predominantly Christian, among them dominantly Roman Catholic, and there is a relatively high degree of acculturation due to Hispanic and American cultural influences. So these 8 groups are the ones that have been colonized by Spain for 300 years and by the US for 50 years, and therefore have adopted many of these Western practices, while the others have relatively maintained their pre-colonial traditions. These 8 groups have strong political influence in the national scene. So they are the groups that are in power. They make up the ethnic majority of Filipinos. And this is why our national symbols mainly come from these 8 groups. For example, when we talk about the national dress of Filipinos, we refer to the Barong Tagalog, baro meaning dress, Tagalog wear. And because this is how Tagalogs dress up on formal occasions, such as wedding ceremonies, graduation ceremonies, and it has been adopted as the official dress in the country, mainly for men, but some variation for women in terms of the sleeves and the skirt, but now have been adopted by other ethnic groups as well. This so-called national house is the Bahay Kubo, which means a, a hut made of thatch. It's raised on stilts, and it is a characteristic of lowland communities, not just of Tagalogs, but of these 8 groups. So the symbols refer to the majority. Now, what is unfortunate, because of these national symbols, the minority groups tend to be invisible in terms of the national scene. And this is what we want to correct. We want to unearth, we want to showcase as well the culture of other groups, other ethnic groups in the country, even if they may be smaller than the 8 ethnic groups. So, what are these other groups? There are more than 100 of them, so I just lumped them into uh, common categories. This is an arbitrary classification on my part, and other anthropologists may use other clustering classifications. So this is only for convenience purposes, mainly for this presentation. So first is Negrito populations. Anyway, I will be discussing each one. The second are Cordillera Peoples in northern Luzon. Third, Cagayan Valley groups. Fourth, the Mangyan peoples. Fifth, Palawan groups. Palawan is an island in central Philippines. Visayan groups, a cluster of islands in central Philippines. The next 3 groups are found in Mindanao Island, the second biggest island, found in the southern part of the Philippines. These are the Lumadnon, the Chavacano, and the Bangsamoro, which is a Muslim group in southern Philippines. So let us look at the characteristics of these groups. First is the Negrito. So as I mentioned, the name Negrito means little black people in Spanish. The Negrito are aboriginal peoples of the Philippines. They are believed to have come to the Philippines from mainland Asia approximately 30,000 years ago. So this picture below is an old picture of Negritos in central Luzon. So they're wearing loincloth. They're mainly nomadic hunters and gatherers. That's why they are spread out throughout the archipelago. And they are found elsewhere in Southeast Asia, such as in Borneo, in Malay Peninsula, and the coastal part of New Guinea. So this is the distribution of Negrito groups in the Philippines. They are called by different names: Aita, Ati, Batak, Agta, Dumagat, Mamanwa. Phenotypically, they look similar, but linguistically, they speak different languages. So these are some pictures of these different groups. The picture below, both the man and the woman are Agta of northeastern Luzon, while the picture above is a Dumagat. So traditionally, Negritos are engaged in hunting and gathering. The Agta of northern Sierra Madre in the eastern part of Luzon Island are still nomadic, while the rest are semi-nomadic or semi-sedentary. Now, this is very interesting for us anthropologists because there are very few remaining hunters and gatherers in the world today. And we want to study about hunters and gatherers because for millions of years, humans around the world were hunters and gatherers. And we could only find out about how they survived by studying extant, extant or existing populations of hunting and gathering groups such as the Agta. They have lost their original languages and now speak languages borrowed from neighboring populations. So this picture at the left shows the Agta house, which is classified by anthropologists as a lean-to because it leans on a pole. It, depending on where the sunshine is, the house rotates. If it is rainy, the Agta uh, person carries the house and brings it under the trees. If it is sunny, it is brought near the river bank. Now, based on ethnographic studies, the Agta of northern Luzon move about at the average of every 3 weeks, mainly following animals such as the wild boar. Now, the picture at the right shows bows and arrows as well as arrow containers used by Negrito groups in the Philippines. Now, let me shift to the second group, people of the Cordillera. So, this is the map of the Philippines, and the red part above is the Cordillera Administrative Region. So the indigenous peoples of the Cordillera Administrative Region are known as Cordillera Peoples. They inhabit the biggest mountain range in the country, known as the Gran Cordillera Central. But actually, they make up different ethnic groups, such as the Bontoc, Ibaloy, Ifugao, Isnag, Itneg, Iwak, Kalanguya, Kalinga, Kankanae. They have different languages. What they share is a common ecosystem. They live in a mountainous environment, and they have made rice terraces, such as the picture shown above. Now, the person at the right, upper right, is a Kalinga man, and you will see he is marked by tattoos on his chest, depicting that he was a warrior in his youth days. The picture below are Ifugao women, and at their back is the famous Banawe rice terraces in Ifugao, a famous tourist site in the Philippines. The picture at the lower left is a typical house of the Ifugao people. Now, what is the culture of the Cordillera people? Their villages are called ili, and each ili is autonomous from one another. The council of elders are the indigenous socio-political unit in the village. Traditionally, there was endemic warfare between different villages, and they practiced head taking. However, peace is maintained through bilateral peace pacts between villages. So there's a system of war and peace. Now, during the American colonial period in the Philippines, the Americans reinforced the peace pact system. It was already there, but the Americans further used this indigenous political system so that it could implement a pacification campaign in the region. So these are examples of material culture of the Cordillera people. The picture on the left are rice granary gods. Usually they are pairs, a man and a woman, and they guard the granary where the rice is kept. The picture on the right is a kalinga skirt, woven, and there would be decorations of seashells. So interestingly, Cordillera is a landlocked region, but the people will trade with lowland communities to get shells and transform this into decorations for their skirts. Now let me show you a short picture of a uh, it was supposed to be a video, but this is a dance among the Kalinga people. Anyway, since I have very little time left, I'll shift to another group. This is the people of Cagayan Valley. So this is in northeastern Philippines, and these are some of the ethnic groups there: the Bugkalot, Gadang, Ibanag, Ibatan, Isinay, Itawes, Itbayaten, Ivatan, Kalinga, Malaweg, Yogad, again differentiated by language, but their languages belong to a common subfamily called Ibanagic languages. They are dominantly Christian, just like the 8 major groups, and also high degree of acculturation, but less acculturation compared to the 8 biggest groups. The picture above shows the Ilongot people. In the past, they were also headhunters, and this is a ritual performance of their headhunting party. The picture below is a typical Ivatan house made of stone and thick thatch roof, because these houses are found in a typhoon belt in the northernmost part of the Philippines. So it's an adaptive mechanism to typhoons. Let me shift to south of Manila. This is Mindoro Island. The people here are known as the Mangyan. The word Mangyan just means human being in their languages, but actually they make up different ethnic groups, with each group having their own languages. So this is a close-up of Mindoro Island. The coastal parts of Mindoro are populated by Tagalogs, but the hinterlands are the different ethnic groups such as the Alangan, Bangon, Buhid, Gobatnon, Hanonoo, Iraya, Ratagnon, Tadjawan, Taobuid. All of them consider themselves as Mangyan, but speak different languages. So to communicate with one another, they would use Tagalog, which is the language of the dominant group. Their subsistence pattern is traditionally Sweden agriculture, that is the practice of slash and burn. Now it is supplemented by hunting and gathering. They are semi-nomadic, so if the rice field is no longer fertile, they will move to another portion of the forest, clear it, and then plant in that area. They have a very strong physical attachment to the environment, so they will have environmental spirits. Generally, they have a sustainable subsistence practice marked by a long fallow period and the propagation of biodiversity. So one study by the American anthropologist Harold Conklin showed that the Hanunoo Mangyan went back to their original farm lot only after 25 years because they allow the soil to replenish its nutrients. Unfortunately, the fallow period is becoming shorter and shorter as lands become limited due to intrusion by migrants. So some pictures of the Mangyans, the practice of teeth blackening. So their traditional skirt and blouse are colored by the indigo dye. They live in long houses, which is related how family units. And one group, which is the Hanunoo Mangyan, have maintained the pre-Hispanic syllabic script. Prior to the coming of the Spanish, a similar syllabic script was used by many Filipinos but have disappeared and replaced by the Latin alphabet. But among the Hanunoo Mangyan, this is still practiced. So this is a picture of a bamboo stick with a poem written in this syllabic script. Okay. South of Mindoro is the island of Palawan. That's the long island that links Luzon with Sabah and the rest of Kalimantan Island in Malaysia and Indonesia. Palawan ethnic groups are known as the Agutainen. There should be no letter K there. Agutainen, Cuyunon, Cagayanen, Kenay, Palawan, Tagbanwa, and Taot Bato. So the picture below is Taot Bato gentleman, so living in a cave area in southern part of Palawan Island. So their subsistence pattern is similar to Mangyan groups, so I won't be discussing that already. So some pictures of their rituals, such as drinking rice wine from a common earthenware jar practiced by the Palawan. And you will see that they use bamboo straws to drink. So there is ritual kinship and brotherhood if you drink from the same jar. The picture at the right is an old photograph of a pagdiwata ritual where a shaman becomes possessed by ancestral spirits. Usually, the shaman is a man, usually a farmer, but when he is possessed, he acquires feminine characteristics because feminine characteristics are identified with divinities. Let us shift to Visayan groups in central Philippines. And among these groups are the Aklanon, Boholano, Bukidnon, also known as Suludnon, Eskaya, and Magahat. So this picture are Bukidnon or people of the mountains, Suludnon, which means people of the interior. You will see that some of them had intermarriage with Negrito groups in the area. Traditionally, peoples of the Visayas lived in interior upland areas of the region. They were farming communities, both wet rice agriculture as well as dry rice, Sweden agriculture. Now, there is one group known as the Eskaya found in Bohol Island in the Visayas, which has its own script, so also called Eskaya script. And this look like pictographs. So the letters represent body parts, but it is not much studied. I have been there and I have the hypothesis that the alphabet was quite recent, probably developed during contact with the Spanish, as marked by certain letters that are Spanish letters, such as H for the letter H, X for the letter X. So, yes, it was indigenous. It was not introduced by the Spanish, but only invented during the Spanish colonial period. Now let us shift to Mindanao. So the color red island is Mindanao Island in southern Philippines. Now, one group of people is known as the Lumadnon or Lumad. So the term Lumad is a Visayan word. So it's an exonym that means native. So these are the indigenous people of Mindanao. The term has been introduced by Visayan migrants into the area. So traditionally, they are the non-Christian, non-Muslim groups of Mindanao. However, at present, many of them have converted either to Christianity or to Islam because of the presence of several religious missionaries in the area. Traditionally, their villages were led by headmen or chieftains called the Datu, similar to the Datu of Malaysia. So these are the different Lumad groups in Mindanao: the Bagobo, Blaan, Bukidnon, Higaonon, Mandaya, Manobo, Mansaka, Matigsalug, Subanan, Tagakaulo, Tiboli, Teduray, Ubo. And you will notice that their costumes, native attire, are very colorful. So, one ethnic group, these are the Tiboli people. They are very famous for their textile known as tinalak, because the designs of the textiles are based on the dreams of the weavers. They don't just weave any design, but they are inspired by dreams. Now, the picture on the right are brassware, also made by the Tiboli. The picture on the upper right is a belt worn by Tiboli men and women. So there are small bells made of brass. And when they walk about, you could hear them walking because these bells ring. These figurines below are also made of brass using the lost wax method. Another group, this is interesting for the Philippines, although they are quite small, they are called the Chavacano. They are the Creole speaking populations in Luzon as well as in Mindanao. But the vibrant group is found in Zamboanga in Mindanao. When we say Creole, they speak a language that originally had many words coming from different languages such as Spanish, Portuguese, because they inhabit port areas that were present during the Spanish colonial period. So Zamboanga City, for example, in Mindanao was a port area. The Chavacano language also had several dialects: Zamboangueño spoken in Mindanao, Caviteño and Ternateño spoken in Luzon, and Ermitaño, now an extinct language that was used to be spoken in Manila. So the text at the left uh, is a Chavacano text. For those who may be familiar with Spanish or Portuguese, it sounds Spanish or Portuguese because it has many words borrowed from these languages, but it is not. It is a unique language for the Philippines. They also have dances such as this dance performed during a Chavacano Foundation Day celebration, and they believe that the Chavacano language was instituted way back in 1635 when a fort in Mindanao, that's Fort Pilar, was established during that year. Now, the last group that I will be talking about is the Bangsa Moro people or the Moro nation. Bangsa meaning nation. They refer to the Islamized groups of Mindanao, Sulu, and southern Palawan. Because in this area, there were Muslim sultanates that were established prior to the coming of the Spanish. The Sultanate of Sulu was established to 1450. The Spanish arrived in the Philippines in 1521. In Maguindanao, the Sultanate of Maguindanao was established during the Spanish contact or prior to the Spanish arrival. This is in 1511. Now, prior to the coming of the Spanish observed that Islam was practiced by the local chiefs from Mindanao all the way to northern Luzon, at least to Pangasinan in northern central Luzon. Even Manila was a Muslim city prior to the coming of the Spanish. But when the Spanish arrived, they were successful in propagating Christianity, and the Bangsamoro groups remained as the Muslim groups in the country. So they are made up of various ethnic groups, with each ethnic group speaking a different language. They are the Bajau, the Iranun, the Jamamapun, Magindanaon, Maranao, Molbog, Sama, Tausug, Yakan. Interestingly, the Bajau are found in the Philippines as well as in Sabah and Sulawesi in Indonesia. The Iranun also found in Sabah. The Tausug found in the Philippines, but they're called Sulu in Malaysia. So because prior to the coming of the Spanish, of course, there was no concept of a Philippines, but sultanates encompassed these maritime communities, and uh, they extended all the way to Indonesia and Malaysia. So the picture shows on the upper picture shows Maguindanaon women wearing a malong skirt. The picture below are Tausug chiefs wearing their traditional attire. This is an old photograph, and they will be holding their ritual swords known as the kris. So this is the kris sword, also used in Malaysia. The picture at the right is a Maranao house known as Torogan, literally meaning sleeping quarters. So it's ornately decorated. Okay, now it's almost time. So let me end with some reflections on challenges in the Philippine setting. The challenge will be how to foster national solidarity, that is, Philippine national solidarity, in a multi ethnic, multicultural setting. How do we assert Filipino identity and nationhood, but at the same time, respecting cultural diversity. So that's the second challenge, how to respect cultural diversity while instilling common national goals. Now, because many of you are museum volunteers and practitioners, an interesting challenge will also be to is also how to represent ethnic diversity in museum exhibits without stereotyping indigenous cultures. So this would be a question mark. Sorry. Uh, yes, there is diversity, but even within each ethnic group, there will also be diversity. And there will also be culture change. So do we only portray traditional attires? I think and I believe we should also portray culture change because of contact with the modern global world. So I won't answer these questions because these are things to ponder upon. And maybe during the discussion, you may also share your thoughts about this. So I will end with this slide. Thank you very much. And if you have further questions, you could email me at ntcastro1 at up.edu.ph. Thank you. Let me stop sharing and welcome questions.
Thank you, Professor. That was a truly fantastic introduction to Philippine ethnic culture. Most of us are not very familiar with, I think, with Philippine, the different Philippine cultural groups. And so this is a great way to pique our interest and get us to study more ourselves. So thank you so much. I will read out a couple of the questions that were asked. One is, what is the history of the categorization of your ethnic groups? Did it start with the Spanish, and how did it change under the American colonialists?
That that's a very good question. Now, in the past, people just do I open my video? Okay, okay. In the past, people just referred to themselves in terms of their ethnic identity as being a person coming from this village or a person coming from this type of ecosystem. So as I mentioned, Tagalog. I am Tagalog. So that means people of the river. So that was the ethnic classification. There won't be any clustering into different generic groups. Now, when the Spanish arrived, the Spanish introduced who are the Christians, who are the non Christians. That was the first distinction. So, tribus Cristianos, Christian tribes, and tribus salvajes or savage tribes. Now, the Americans continued this practice and introduced a different category or classification. They said civilized groups and savage groups. So that was the American classification. But of course, there were American anthropologists that came into the Philippines also and mainly copied categories coming from Native Americans. So that's why they called Filipinos as Indios or Indians. And they were also placed on reservations. So the Americans introduced the distinction of Muslims versus Christians. Up to now, we have this problem because sometimes if there's conflict in the southern part of the Philippines, it will always be portrayed as a conflict between Muslims and Christians. But actually, it's not a religious problem, but it's a problem because of lack of access to economic resources, lack of access to education, but it is almost always translated into the media as a religious conflict. So the colonizers have changed the narrative in this categorization.
That's very interesting because, as you say, Mindanao, for example, is always portrayed as a religious conflict.
Yes.
So that's very interesting to know. There's a couple of other questions. I think we have time for them. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing this. Is Masadit Salapadan a dialect of the Itneg language?
Yes. Salapadan is the name of the village in Abra province. So Masadiit is a particular tribe of the Tingyan groups. Of course, different anthropologists will have different classification systems. Some will say, oh, it's a distinct ethnic group by itself. Don't lump them together with the Tingyans because Tingyan is also an outsiders category, which means people of the highlands. So, as I mentioned at the start of my lecture, the clustering is only for convenience purposes for this discussion, but we could talk about distinct ethnic groups even within each cluster.
This is another question for someone I think who's interested in the subject and wants to take their study further. Could you recommend some reference books on the various ethnicities and their cultures?
Okay. I don't know if they're available outside the Philippines, but we have a National Commission for Culture and the Arts. This is a government body, and it has published a short monograph. It's called Glimpses of Philippine Culture. So it's a brief summary of the characteristics of each group. The author is Dr. Jesus Peralta, who is also an anthropologist. Um, the CCP, Cultural Center of the Philippines, has produced several volumes about Philippine culture, and there will be entries about, so it's like an encyclopedia of Philippine culture, and there will be entries about different ethnic groups. Now, the other references are very distinct to particular ethnic groups. So, different anthropologists have studied particular regions. So, there would be anthropologists who studied Cordillera groups only and Mindanao groups only. For the person who asked this question, you could email me and I could send you references of particular ethnic groups that you are interested in.
That, thank you. That's really very kind of you. I will pass on your email ID to the person who asked this question. It's also the same person who emailed us before your talk asking for
Okay.
information. So, one last question. The poem about the bamboo was very interesting. Do you have any more information on it?
Okay. So, as I mentioned, prior to the coming of the Spanish, we have our own syllabic writing. Even the Tagalogs had their own writing system. When the Spanish arrived, the first religious Catholic prayers were written in this native script by the Spanish because they want to teach religion to Filipinos. The Spanish adopted the writing system. So it's a syllabic form of writing where each character is a particular syllable, a combination of a consonant and a vowel. But later and later, the Spanish shifted into introducing the Latin alphabet. So probably it was during the 18th century when this syllabic script disappeared among the majority ethnic groups of the Philippines. But it is still found in Mindoro among the Mangyan and in Palawan among the Tagbanwa and Palawan. Now, in Mindoro, they call that poetry as ambahan. It's a love poem. So this is used when they would write. to their loved ones to court them so that they will be their girlfriend. Uh, Sometimes they're written on these bamboo slabs. Sometimes they would be written on bamboo stands along a trail where they know a woman will pass through, and the woman will see this syllabic graffiti actually addressed to a particular girl that the man is courting. So, one anthropologist, this is Antun Posma, he has published a book about several ambahan poetry of the Hanunoo Mangyan, written both in the syllabic script translated into English. So if you're interested, I will also give a reference about this type of poetry.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think we could go on, but unfortunately, that's all we have time for. It was an amazing talk, and it really, I think it's been a fantastic introduction to the various Philippine ethnicities. And I hope it encourages a lot of us to do our own research into this as well. Thank you again. Before we
Well,
finish, I have a couple of announcements.